Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Engage for Success Education Thought and Action Group's first webinar. My name is Cathy Brown. I'm your host for the evening. And the first thing I need to tell you is that we are recording today's session, so please be aware of that if you're sending us any questions. And if you want to refer to it again later, it will be available to download once we've done that. And we are tweeting, so please do come and find us on Twitter. The hashtag of Stop Teacher Disengagement will find us. So please do come and get involved in the conversation. Our subject tonight is, in fact, stopping teacher disengagement. And I want to tell you a little bit about Engage for Success itself as well before we get going. So Engage for Success is the UK's national movement for employee engagement. We aim to raise awareness of the topic and of the importance of the topic. And we aim to shine a light on all of the great work that is already out there, out in the UK at the moment, around engagement and how we make work a better experience for all of us involved. So our dedicated volunteers get involved in groups like the one that we're talking about today, the Thought and Action Group for Education. And the Thought and Action groups actually get together to look at specific areas of engagement. And as we said, the one we're looking at today is stopping teacher disengagement specifically. And this is a subject really close to my heart. I come from a family of teachers, and so I've seen teachers go through horrible experiences and become really deeply disengaged. And that's a terrifying thought when you think that our children's education is in their hands, but actually the future of the UK is in their hands through our children and anybody who is coming through the education system. So I can't think really of a more important area to make sure that the people involved in it are in fact engaged in their work, that they feel passionate about it, and that they are able to do the best job that they can do. So we have a really illustrious panel to share their thoughts and ideas with you today. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So I'm going to first of all call on Sharon Gray to just give us a minute to introduce herself to us.
Very much. Hi, I'm Sharon Gray, and I've been in education all my life. The last 4 years as an independent consultant, and previous to that, for 20 years, I was a head teacher of a number of different schools. Some were special schools and some mainstream schools. The special schools were serving children experiencing social, emotional and mental health difficulties, and mainstream was predominantly primary. And now just have an absolute passion about authentic inclusion, supporting our most vulnerable learners and ensuring that we've got a really good, strong education system that's truly fit for purpose to inspire our future generations. So that's me.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sharon. Emma, if I can come to you next, please.
Yes, thank you for inviting me on. I am first and foremost professionally a teacher. I've been teaching for 21 years now, predominantly in London and the London area. I still teach almost full time. I spend a little bit of extra time doing writing. I have a doctorate in balancing teaching and parenting, and I recently published my book, How to Survive in Teaching. I write regularly for the TES as a columnist, and I try desperately to balance each negative article with a positive one to try to keep things upbeat.
Lovely, thank you, Emma. Stephanie.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Hill. I've been in education all my life as well. Originally from Australia, I've taught in the UK for around about 8 years now, on and off. And I've in education mainly in schools working with professional learning and the development of teachers. And then I'm also a researcher. So I've done my Masters in Education, and I'm currently doing my doctorate. And I'm very lucky actually to be able to work in the area of student agency and how student agency is allowing and helping and enabling school improvement.
Super, thank you, Stephanie. And last but very not least, Kay.
Hi, so I'm Kay Sidebottom. I'm based at the University of Leeds. I run a learning and teaching degree programme, which is primarily for mature students. Tends to be women who are wanting to get back into education and very often wanting to work either as primary teachers or in the lifelong learning sector. So I work with kind of people who are really interested in getting into teaching. They mainly work as teaching assistants currently, so they're kind of at the cutting edge really of where it's all happening. My background is mainly FE, but lots of teaching experience across a sort of wide range of sectors. And I'm currently doing a PhD, so I'm very interested in researching alternative approaches to education and maybe thinking about ways to teach differently, which might engage teachers in different ways.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kay. And thank you all of you for making the time to be here this evening. I know we've got a series of excellent questions to pose to our panel. And of course, if you in the audience have questions as well, please do send them in on the chat. What we will do is we will spend about half an hour with our panel and a series of questions that we will go through, and possibly a series of polls as well that obviously we will ask you to participate in. And we will have then about approximately 15 minutes at the end of the session where we will pose your questions to the panel and get their responses. And if we do have any that remain unanswered, if we run out of time, then obviously we will make sure that those questions do get answered by our panel, and we will get them out to you by other means. So the first thing that we're going to do is actually the very first poll. What do you hope that you can get from this session that we're going to do here? So you've got a number of options. Do you want to hear ideas about how we can find solutions to teacher disengagement? Share your ideas to stop teacher disengagement, to meet new people who also want to make a positive change for the future, and to find out more about this movement, or all of the above? So hopefully you can see that poll in front of you. I can certainly see mine. I might have a little vote. Let me have a look. And if you just click submit, that should then put itself into the poll. And we will see, by the magic of technology, what then happens. Always fascinating. And we wait with bated breath to see what happens. Oh, what's happening? Can we see the poll? If we don't switch to it in the next couple of minutes, oh, there we go, we can see it. Here we go. Lots of people wanting all of the above. I think that's very good. And we can see that roughly a quarter of us want to know about solutions and want to meet new people, and to find out a little bit more about this movement. Well, hopefully we will fit in with all of those things. And one of the things that we're very keen for people to do as we progress through the session this evening is for you to sign up, so that we can keep in touch with you about what we do with this movement as well. So lovely. We will commence in that case with our questions. What I shall do, panel, is I will read out the question and then I will come to you in turn. So I will obviously let you know who it is that I would like to come to first. So what does teacher disengagement look like to you based on your experience? And Emma, if you don't mind, we will start with you.
Sure. Just to offer a little bit of context, I feel a bit at the moment as if I've got Pollyanna on one shoulder and Winch's a scream on the other, because I've been doing some research, some new research into teacher disengagement, and I put out a tweet, a sort of chance to tweet on Saturday night saying, if you've experienced a toxic school, let me know. And I have about 230 emails and counting. So I've got all these horrific stories, which range from suicide attempts through to marriage breakdowns, through to disappearances of staff, just horror upon horror upon horror. I've always been very positive. And then at the same time, yesterday I was at the the Education Support Roundtable event, which was also, it published their Teacher Wellbeing Index. And again, these statistics are absolutely shocking around alcoholism, around depression, particularly in senior leaders. So this is, I think, what we previously thought was an extreme and maybe an anomaly, and I know I can be a bit naive in my positivity, is now becoming increasingly the norm. You've got 37% of senior leaders relying on alcohol to wind down in the recent Education Support publication. And so we really do, and I hate saying this because I am a natural optimist, but we really do have a crisis on our hands, and it feels to me as if we're hitting the point where actually really enough is enough. We are, the crisis has hit crunch point. Day-to-day disengagement is something slightly different in my experience, but it builds, and I think this is what we need to be aware of, that when you do speak to Julian Stanley in Education Support, they'll say it's better to get in early. So the day-to-day disgruntlement, the duplication of data, the feeling of being mistrusted, of being over-scrutinised, of being checked on, all of these things take a toll on teachers. And if that toll is being taken day in, day out, it starts to result in, you know, things that seem minor. We brush under the carpet, an extra glass of wine on a Monday night, insomnia, irritability with family, forgetting to stock the fridge with food that's remotely edible, you know, all the so I think you've got the small things, which are really, really important, that then build up into something much bigger. And I think we really do have a huge problem with teacher disengagement, which is why I really welcome this evening and this movement, because we need something urgently now.
Thank you, Emma. Kay, if I can come to you with the same question, what does teacher disengagement look like to you? What do you see out there?
Very similar to Emma. So one of my students just recently did a really interesting research project and had a similar kind of absolutely swamped by responses of teachers wanting to tell their stories. And she was asking teachers about wanting to leave the sector, put out a Twitter poll and had about 600 responses to her survey, which was quite, as an undergraduate for her doing some research, was quite amazing really. But very much the same, people talking about work and family conflict, lots of things about poor leadership and management and how that was affecting them, but manifesting in the exact symptoms that Emma described just then. So I think there's obviously the external factors, the things that we can see, poor retention, lots of turnover, possibly poor results and things like that. But then there's also these interior things that are going on that might take a while to sort of manifest. But certainly poor mental health, stress, sickness, all of those things. But I think also, and possibly even more sadder than that, is the sort of cynicism that I'm starting to get a sense that people are just getting very resigned to how things are, which feels really unhealthy to me. In a way, I kind of prefer the anger, because you can work, you can work with that. You can think about activism and making change. But I get the sense that people are becoming so worn down that the fight is kind of going a little bit. So exactly as Emma's saying, I think there is a certain sense of crisis, I think, here.
Thank you. Steph, I'm going to come to you. I can see you nodding.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, I think in my experience, it seems to almost be working in 3 different dimensions, and it's not as if they are sequential or they necessarily go in one way, but in one direction. But I think if we sort of look at it more like on the macro level, you've got this disengagement in the politics of education. So the frustration around the expectations, the frustration with having to deal with the changes. And I think too, probably what is even more concerning is a step back from the conversations about education that we see on a national and international level. People are no longer wanting to be a part of that because they just see that, well, maybe there's not as much point in being engaged in that conversation. And then if you look more at the meso level, the sort of organisational level, there is a lack of teachers, or a disinterest in teachers wanting to connect with each other as professionals. We're noticing a disinterest or a growing disinterest in their own professional learning, and also in that whole idea of the core purpose of what you do as an organisation. And then I think at the micro level, what is the most concerning is that disconnection from students. And we see this breakdown in the relationships between teachers and students, and also I think a growing sort of disconnection with the challenge of teaching. And you know, every individual student has their challenges and has things that, as teachers, one of the things that we want to be able to do is to be able to look at that and say, okay, you're an individual, what is it that you need in order to grow? And there's a growing disconnection with that, and I don't think it's the fault of teachers or the lack of willingness to want to engage with it. I think that the mental health issues are really quite significant in that. And if a teacher has a sense of hopelessness, and almost a sense of loss of their identity, so it's no longer who they are as a teacher, it becomes something where it's what they do as a job, and that is always going to lead to more disengagement.
Absolutely. Steph, do you think that's particularly prevalent in teachers because so many people, I think, go into teaching because they feel a calling, quite literally? Do you think that makes it worse?
Yeah, and I think that is it, because it's certainly not because of the money, and I mean, we know that. It's because it's a vocation. It's because actually there's a call to you have a purpose that goes beyond that day to day, and you actually want to contribute, I think, to your community, your local community, but also to the wider world, and so that sense of hopelessness becomes even more damaging, I think.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate. Sharon, if I can come to you on this one as well, please.
Yeah, I totally concur with all that's been said, and absolutely, I think teaching is an absolute passionate calling. You know, we're in this to serve our kids, the desire to make a positive difference, facilitating development, you know, of better people than we are, and to make that difference. And I think one of the issues around this, reiterating much of what's been said, but the kind of the reduction of the depth of relationship that teachers still feel that they have with the profession itself. And I think, and as a result of that, the issues around mental health and disconnection, and the impact that potentially has on the students, the children with whom we're working, the number of those youngsters that teachers touch in any one day, and all of those, you know, in terms of teachers, and not as a result of their own fault, as it were, but what's being done around them, losing the autonomy, potentially, that passion that they came in for enables that sort of creative thinking, which, if we're not careful, is being reduced so significantly because curriculums in cans almost, you know, and that the reduction in creating almost inspiring learning environments, really getting to know the students and being able to meet their needs effectively, because we can do that pulling upon our own resources in collaboration and connection with other professionals around us. And I think all of those things have been impacted quite significantly.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, the point about innovation actually and creativity, because we don't necessarily immediately associate those words with teaching. But I completely agree with you that creating that environment in which children want to learn absolutely is both creative and requires an innovative outlook. And the work that was done by Engage for Success a couple of years ago clearly demonstrated that if you are working in an engaged organisation, then 57% of people will say that work brings out their most creative ideas. But if you're in the disengaged side of things, only 3% of people say the same. So there is absolutely a proven research-driven connection between levels of disengagement and very low levels of creativity and innovation. And on that sort of note, Emma, I'm going to come to you again on this one to start with. What are the potential consequences if we don't take action to sort this out now, if we don't start looking at teacher engagement immediately?
I'm seriously worried. I actually feel slightly sick when I think about it. I mean, the bottom line is, you know, if we can talk about feelings, we can talk about crises, we can talk about the fact that my own children aren't going to have decent teachers, so we're effectively scuppering our own children's futures. But if we want to talk in terms of hard data and actually get some proper attention from the powers that be, I suppose, who actually can have an influence on this, we're going to need 47,000 new teachers by 2020. The rate things are going at, there's no way we're going to achieve that. So you know, I mean, what will happen if we do not address this now is that the profession will continue to hemorrhage teachers. Schools will increasingly rely on short-term contracts, overseas teachers, the bright young things who come in and then get turned out again 3 years later by the toxic environment. And the bottom line is that our students will be getting a really rough deal, and they don't deserve that. So I'm really worried. I have to say, I'm more worried than I was when I was actually writing the book 2 years ago. Yeah.
Steph, your view on that?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I would completely agree with everything that Emma has said, but I think the other part of that is that even if we look beyond recruitment and retention, the change in the school culture is really worrying, and students, they understand and they get it. They're picking up on this, like the disengagement of teachers. Our young people are noticing that change in culture, and they're working now and learning within an environment where they're feeling that pressure, not only from exams, but they're also feeling the pressure because their staff, their teachers, are also actually starting to disengage, they're also becoming increasingly more stressed, and they're also suffering under mental health. And I think that it's the culmination of that even the teachers that are staying in the profession, the teachers that are staying engaged, are also left to sort of start to deal with that growing disengagement. So I think it's that kind of culmination, that layering effect as well, that's really having a significant impact.
Yeah. Sharon.
And again, I concur, and I think the issue is around the superficial elements of change that we're starting to hear about, which sound quite refreshing in many ways. Amanda Spielman recently talking about the board and curriculum, looking at through the potential new framework for Ofsted from next year, sort of looking for off-rolling and moving away from teaching to the test, but yet schools will still be judged by league tables, and so there will be those pressures. And as Steph, I think, is alluding to, it needs some significant change from within to create a culture and ethos in our schools that everybody can really thrive and be inspired and inspire. And I think that's a significant shift in terms of the culture of what needs to be done. And alongside that, some really courageous leadership within our settings to be able to really manage what's coming through and the pressures that our teachers, our staff in schools, and ultimately our children are feeling.
Sharon, do you think it's sort of contributing to the problem, the way that I suppose the world of work is changing, and we're reaching a position where basically we need to be learning all of our lives, but our schools don't actually teach our children to learn particularly well? And just interested in your view on that.
Yeah, I think that we do need an element of a knowledge-based curriculum, but wrapped around that is a skills approach, so that we can use our knowledge in a variety of different ways, which then takes it into long-term memory, which means that we will be learning on the journey. And absolutely, I think that's crucial. But alongside that, I think it's how we can then also support all of our staff, the adults in the school, to maintain and continue their absolute drive for their own professional learning, and for that to again ignite and infect that love of learning from our very youngest children coming into the setting. Some of us who have been in it for quite some time.
No, indeed, and that relates very strongly back to the indications that we were talking about earlier, in that we're seeing teachers become less interested in their own development, which I genuinely think is quite a scary place to be.
And I think part of that is about survival, about teachers knuckling down, children knuckling in, and going into very much survival mechanism.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
And in terms of the very makeup, when we're in that survival mode, we're not really in a space to socially engage, collaborate, connect, and then go into higher order thinking, learning and retention.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Kay, just coming to you on the potential consequences if we don't take action.
Yeah, I think again it's at different levels, isn't it? I think for teachers as individuals, I mean, these are people who are also citizens, of this country, and who entered the profession with a desire to do a job. So there's going to be an effect on them individually, even if they leave. They're not fulfilled in terms of what they could have achieved individually, and that it's a large profession that has a massive impact. There's obviously on a community level as well. And I think there's something about inequality as well within the system, as you get a drift of teachers maybe to schools that are more comfortable, where the leadership is better and they feel more supported. Parents don't have choice really very often about where they send their kids. So you're going to see further inequalities in the system with good schools, not so good schools, and people being very trapped within that. And I think as well, there's something about diversity for me. There's something lovely about being in a school where there's a range of different styles, a range of older teachers, younger teachers. You're getting this big drift of older teachers leaving the profession, which I think is just a massive loss in so many ways in terms of experience. And as I say, that just range of input and diversity, which we know is such an important thing.
No, absolutely. I completely agree. And guys, I know that we've got questions coming in, which is brilliant. So we'll be able to come to those. We've got a couple more for the panel that we will pose, but keep on sending them in, because that will be absolutely superb. So I'm sure along with you guys, I'm feeling quite miserable now. So we've done the miserable bit. Let's try and be a little bit more optimistic. If you had a magic wand, what would you do? What's the one thing, the one change that you would make that would help to engage teachers more in their teaching? Steph, I'm going to come to you first.
I've got 3, if that's okay.
3's great. I love 3.
I think to start with, I think we need to, like Sharon said before, we need to be courageous. I think it's the time for reform is over. We need to think about a system, you know, reset rather than just reform. And that really needs to be going back to that question of, well, what's the purpose of education? Like, what are we here for? And really, why have we moved so far away from that? And I think that if we can be really authentic and really honest with ourselves about what's going on, and we are able to answer the question as to, is it about, are we developing the whole child? And if we're not, why not? And what's going on there? Because at the end of the day, teachers go into the profession because they want to make that significant difference, and they are engaged not just with the academic intelligence of a child, but social and emotional intelligence, their ability to express themselves, their ability to take risks, their ability to be creative. Like, all of those things are why we become teachers. And when that becomes deprofessionalized, we're not able to do that. That's incredibly crushing. So I think we really need to come back to and probably come back to that whole idea of the professionalism, move away from that whole idea of we can only value what we can measure. I mean, it's just a way out. We're better than that. You know, look at what we value and then let's figure out a way to measure it rather than the other way around. And I think the best place to start there, my second one would actually be with going back to students and bring them into the conversation, where we're so worried sometimes, I think, about sort of bringing students in for so many reasons, but actually when you do that, it's incredible how much they can contribute and how authentic they are in their contributions, how respectful they are. And when we've done work in the past with students actually being engaged with school improvement, what they do as well is they re-engage teachers, because they show teachers why they're valued and how important it is for them. And even little things like students come back and say, oh, I had no idea how much time you spent and effort you spent planning my lesson. Like, there's so much work that goes on behind the scenes. So that mutual respect re-engages teachers, because in so many ways our performativity context has taken that away, and it's a deficit model. It's, this is what you're not doing right, rather than this is what you're doing, this is how you're contributing to me. And I think the third one is that schools are not the same across the country and across the world, and they shouldn't be. You know, we're here, schools should serve the community in which they are located, and that means that they're going to be different. It means that there's different individuals that have different needs, and unless we actually give schools the autonomy to do that, then the learning environment within that school is not going to be nurturing and compassionate and courageous, and it's not going to instill that creativity and that desire to take risks for staff as well as for students. If we can do that, I think that's the first step to re-engaging teachers in their own professional learning, to creating learning organisations, and for teachers to recognise that actually they're not the only ones that have this role in learning and in building the school, that actually it's everyone in the school. So I think that's a good grounding.
Absolutely. And it's one of the classic principles of engagement is involvement of everybody. And again, we don't necessarily tend to apply that into education. But, you know, having had a kid go through sixth form, you know, from 16 to 18, he would have been brilliant in contributing to what was going on with his education, and certainly before that as well. So I think that's a superb point. Kay, I'm going to come to you. What's your magic wand moment?
Oh, I've got so many. I could do that. Funnily enough, the research we did that, when we were asking teachers about leaving the sector, one of the things we also asked was what makes you stay, because really that's just as interesting in many ways. And there were some quite balanced responses, but the main one was about making a difference to a child's life. That was what people were saying was the reason that they were staying in teaching. And I think my magic wand would be to give teachers the control to be able to carry on doing that, essentially. And I think the word autonomy has been mentioned a few times, but autonomy is absolutely key to this, but also trust, and trust in professionalism, as Steph said, letting people have choice and make decisions about how they manage their classroom, how they manage interactions, and flexibility as well. I'm sorry, I'm going on with like the magic wand here, aren't I?
Right.
Flexibility, so that they can, because how can you make a difference to a child's life when you have to treat all children in the same way, or you're told to do a lesson in a certain way? You can't do that. So allowing people autonomy and choice, I think, and the freedom to make their own decisions, to direct the teacher and how they see best fit as a professional.
That actually touches on a lot of the questions that we're getting in from the audience. So I may well go to those in a minute. Sharon, magic wand.
Very similar to the others. For me, there were three sort of themes that I was considering, which is about the purpose, the moral purpose, the child at the centre, and the social emotional health and well-being of the children and all stakeholders within the communities that we serve being absolutely at the fore and maintaining that moral purpose. Within that, sort of the professional development and learning of all of those staff alongside children, students, young adults, so that we are inspiring and continuing to ignite and preparing ourselves for future changes, and alongside that, the social, emotional, mental health element, developing that resilience to be able to overcome the adversity that we will naturally face in life, and that's quite important, and the autonomy. And I think Kay's been sort of very clear about that. The magic wand is allowing our staff, our leaders, our learners to really get to know each other, form the connections and collaborations, and then the staff, the autonomy to, with a real passion, find what works for those individuals and draw upon their capacities, be it within themselves, through the professional learning and the connection and collaboration to get it right for those children and to celebrate that kind of success.
Absolutely. Emma, I'm going to come to you with the magic wand as well.
And I'm going to be the maverick teacher and say I don't like that question. I don't think we need magic. I don't think we need a wand. There's so much that's happening that's wonderful, like this discussion tonight. What we need to do is pull together everything that's happening with education support, everything that's happening with this group, everything that's happening with the NFBR, and actually start moving forward in a really collaborative way. Because the danger is, I think, since I started calling to action in my book, is that there are all sorts of lovely discussions happening, but that they don't result in actual action and moving forward. And as we've all alluded to, we've hit a point where we're all feeling distinctly miserable. Enough is enough, and we simply now need to all move forward collaboratively with everything everyone else has just said. Let's get the trust back, let's get the autonomy back. Agency is another word that's come up a lot, and refocus on the students.
Absolutely. Agency is coming up in a number of the questions that I'm reading through that are coming out to me. And in fact, a number of the things that we've just touched on there are absolutely clearly things that are on people's minds, judging from the questions that are coming through. So I'm actually going to take a couple of the questions now that are coming in from the audience. How do you think the narrative of making a difference to students' lives is used as moral blackmail in schools where there is a toxic environment? I mean, have any of you seen an example of that? If you either nod or wave at me, and then I'll come to you if any of you have got an example on the panel where you've seen almost moral blackmail in that way.
Oh.
Emma, yeah?
Yeah, I have just thought of an example actually, and it's the results-driven, league tables-driven. It's from a few years ago actually, but I do remember being told by a governor that my team and I had let down an entire generation of young people who hadn't done as well in German as they should have done. And we did the post-mortem and committed the Harry-Carry and got better. But yes, there's an example of that. And it was horrible. And I still, I still lose sleep over that one. But yes, that sense of those results being the ultimate measure of our success as a team, yes.
Sharon?
I'm thinking of sort of some of the schools that I'm endeavouring to support at the moment around children with quite complex special educational needs. And in actual fact, in some of our mainstream settings, despite the staff doing the most incredible job and going above and beyond to effectively meet the needs as best they can, there's something additional that's needed that isn't currently there. And sort of the feedback being given from, at times, local authorities that in actual fact you're letting that child down if you're not able to meet their needs. But in actual fact there's a real cry for additional support that's not being given.
Yeah. Steph?
I think it's also about, it can be hijacked if that whole idea of what is making a difference is changed. And if making a difference for a school is everyone getting a certain progress 8 or having a certain number of GCSEs, then I think then it can be warped, and that's where it becomes kind of that pull towards something that perhaps is skewed, and it's away from the reason that we went in to become teachers in the first place. So yeah.
Absolutely. Kay, have you got anything to add to that one?
Yeah, I think there's something really dangerous about that sort of weaponizing of that drive and that vocational element of teaching. And something that we don't often talk about is the kind of cost of the emotional labour. So we just mentioned special educational needs, and I know a lot of the students that I work with who are based in schools, that is what they're spending their time doing, but without any control over that, without any money, having to make incredibly hard ethical decisions about resourcing day after day after day. And that intensity of that emotional labour is never quantified anywhere, but it isn't something you can say, you know, you spent so many hours doing that, this is the outcome. That's the stuff that you go home with and you mull over at night and all of these kind of things. And I think that goodwill is often used against people, and ethically that feels really bad to me.
This follows on to a great question that's just come in. So I suspect that us on the panel and myself, we're all very much agreed that we do see generally teaching as a calling, as a vocation. Certainly that was my experience growing up with a father who was a headmaster, with a stepmother who was in senior leadership levels. With my brother is a principal over in Northern Ireland. So I come absolutely from a teaching background. So if we want teaching to continue to be that, we think that's a valuable way of looking at teaching, how can we attract the next generation of teachers into the profession? Which I think is an amazing question. So Sharon, I'm going to come to you first with that one.
I think it's going to have to go back to that sort of courageous leadership and throughout schools, absolutely putting the child first at the centre, and knowing by taking that holistic approach, you know, we will be able to support them and enable them to achieve in what matters most for them in terms of being truly prepared for next generation. And as a result of that, I think our current teachers and teachers of the future will be far more motivated to come back feeling that they will be able to make that difference, which is why the majority of us came into this in the first place. And I think it's about really starting to share that more sort of widely across the country, that if we put those children at the very heart of everything that we're doing, and that social emotional well-being for all of our stakeholders involved, we will get those results in terms of better outcomes. And I'm not talking about progress 8 measures or end of key stage 2. I'm talking about youngsters who are healthy and are able to step out into the world and then go on to make a positive difference themselves.
Superb. Emma?
Well, given that we haven't got a magic wand, I think what we need to be doing is actually preparing prospective teachers for how it really is at the moment. I don't think we can sugarcoat things for them. I think we need to be preparing them, telling them what they're likely to struggle with, being realistic with them about the impact of the funding cuts and the nature of data collection as it is at the moment, given that we can't change the world overnight. But at the same time, balancing that against obviously the joy of being a child, being with children, and the joy of making a difference to a child's life. But I think it's really important that we do get that balance and give teachers a chance to articulate what being a teacher means to them, to actually almost you know, have a psychologist have to go through psychology themselves. You know, what is it that, you know, getting them to identify their moral purpose from quite an early stage. And actually giving them that fire in their bellies, but at the same time saying to them, look, November is going to be tough. You know, November is going to be bleak, it's going to be challenging, but what tools can you use? You know, where are your safety nets? Who's going to support you through that? So I think it's about a combination of realism and fire in the belly.
Yeah, absolutely. That touches on another question that had come in earlier around, do we feel that the initial teacher training prepares novice teachers properly for the challenges of the job? And I would suggest at the moment it really doesn't, really doesn't at all. So absolutely, a nice dose of realism there.
Yeah, I mean, and there are some ridiculous stories that have come to me about that. There was one quite well-known institution which at which the tutor told one of the trainees, or told also all of the trainees, to leave their lives at the door. You know, there should be a sign above the door, he said, saying, leave your lives at the door, and to the whole cohort, which was then back to me. And I just think the messages coming out of some of the training institutions are really worrying. Similarly, there are many of them doing an amazing job, and we need to be celebrating the positives as well.
Definitely. Kay, so bringing new people into the profession, bringing that next generation in, what do you reckon?
It's really hard, because that's kind of part and parcel of my job, and you know, it's that thing where don't really like to use the word subversion, but how can we kind of get inside the system and change it from within? We do quite a bit of thinking about that, and there's a really big clash for me between that idea of a vocation and a calling to a particular career, and working in what is essentially a neoliberalist system of competition, market, and all of that sort of stuff. How do you kind of square that circle when you've got this desire to teach and a belief in that you can do good and all of those sort of things, when you're in a system that is really not encouraging people to work and think in those ways? Something that we do a lot in class with the trainees I teach with is values work. So we think a lot about our own personal values, our own ethics and morals, and how they play out, so at least people can feel they're being true to themselves, even within the system that they might find themselves in. And then start to think about how they can make connections, how they can work outside the systems informally through networks like this, or just through support from each other and those kind of things. So thinking about how it's not all about those formal structures, but how they can work differently to maybe make some kind of a change or get the support that they need.
Yeah, absolutely. And Steph, on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I think that whole idea of developing a teacher identity that is values driven and really incorporates the moral purpose is important. But I think it's also about developing psychological capital really early, about recognising, like Emma said, the psychology behind what it means to be a teacher, and the psychology of looking after yourself and your own mental well-being. And I think that really is around that conversation of vulnerability, that actually the vulnerability about who you are as a teacher and what it means to be a teacher and what it means to be part of the current system. It's important to know that actually that's okay. You don't need to harden yourself against it, and you don't need to sort of bat away all the things that actually might come at you. That if you develop that psychological capital, you can deal with the things that come at you. You can deal with the trauma, the adversity, and I think that strength and that inner strength, if we can build that up in our younger teachers, people will see that, and more people will be attracted to the profession as well.
That's really interesting. We've actually just had a question come in. Steph directed it yourself, although I think it's broadly covered by everything that we just said in the last couple of minutes. But saying that there's obviously a lot of work in schools around wellbeing and happiness, both with the staff and the children. And is there something dangerous around making our children particularly happy with, with such a broken system? And my response to that would be, acceptance is not the same as resignation. So I think in order to change it, we need to accept the reality of what it is. But I can see that that's an interesting point there of are we almost papering over cracks? What do you reckon?
Well, I think you could do that, and I think there are probably some wellbeing initiatives, happiness initiatives out there that do that a little bit, and I think it is important that with staff and students, that it's about how do you recognise that the reality is you will go through trauma, personal trauma. Actually, you'll also deal with trauma of young people. And there's a lot of research now around the fact that the trauma that we deal with day to day with young people does have an impact and does affect teachers. It's almost a secondary trauma in a lot of ways. So I think it's important that we're realistic with the way that we deal with that conversation, that it is about how we grow after trauma. It's about sort of arming ourselves with different techniques, having genuine coaching, having sort of looking at the research around positive psychology. And I think that is a way of making sure that it doesn't just become a band-aid. It becomes something that genuinely starts within the school, grows across the school, and is part of what each person knows that they can do. Even if really terrible things happen, they're armed with the techniques and strategies to be able to deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got a lot of people asking how they get further involved, which is great. So we are going to talk a little bit about that towards the end of the call. But certainly one of the options is for us to run a bigger event. And I think certainly the questions from our audience tonight are demonstrating that would certainly be of value, I think. But we will be putting out ways that you can obviously connect with us and stay in touch with us and get involved. So another question that's come in that actually I think is really fascinating is, I'm just paraphrasing it slightly, but so we've talked very much about the teachers, quite obviously, and we've talked a lot about the children. Are we actually missing out a vital component of that in the form of the parents? And looking at how possibly the education profession could be better equipped to support family life, both for the teachers, but also in that involvement of everybody who's involved in the child's education. So Emma, you were nodding incredibly vigorously to that one, so I'm going to come to you first.
Yeah, well, I think it's the biggest irony, isn't it, when you read the headlines about how teaching is a family unfriendly profession, and yet we're working with children who are essentially in a big family as a school. So yes, I do think we often overlook parents, and in terms of supporting students with being whole humans. I suppose it comes back to that what we were talking about earlier, when teachers are so stressed that they're reptilian and surviving and struggling to cope. What kinds of role models are they projecting in terms of work-life balance and being a whole human being? So I think I was nodding vigorously because I was reflecting on the irony of teaching as a family unfriendly profession.
Absolutely. Sharon, what about your views on that one?
Absolutely. I think it's fundamental to involve the wider community, and families are a significant part of that. And sort of to flip it, some of the schools that I've visited, observed, had the privilege to be involved in have enabled partnerships with parents in a very engaging way, and so created space and time to truly ensure that the parents feel that they are really contributing and working alongside. They're the expert of their children there to support and advise, and where that's happened, it's been really, the outcomes have been significantly improved for the children, but for the entire community coming together as well. So again, as Emma was just saying, it's kind of taking that reflection space to actually create time for our teachers to be able to do the sort of the moral purpose, the core task of their jobs, and if it be a homeschool liaison worker or somebody else who can really pick up and support and give that more intensive support, in actual fact, it potentially can save time and money and ensure well-being for all involved at a greater depth.
No, definitely. Kay?
I think, yeah, absolutely, parents are really key to all of this, but I think there's also something that possibly needs doing around sort of parental literacy, if you like, in terms of understanding the right questions to ask and the right ways to be critical of what schools are doing, because I think very often parents, like the teachers, are starting to become quite cynical, maybe switching off, maybe feel really disempowered. I'm thinking of academisation and things like that, where parents don't necessarily, you know, who does understand how a multi-academy trust works and all the finances and all the layers of governance and the changes with things like that. To be able to go in and ask the really critical questions that hold people to account, I'm not sure parents are fully equipped to do that, and I'm not sure people necessarily want them to be. So I think there's possibly a job of work that could be done there, just to say, you know, things like even like uniform changes and from the small scale stuff right up to things like becoming a mat. Yeah, something that helps parents feel empowered, I think, would be really good too.
And Steph?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's about coming back to that idea of the school as a product of the community, and it also builds the community. And so parents are a part of that, and families are a part of that. I think that engaging all aspects of the family, whether they be grandparents or brothers or sisters, in the school and what goes on in the school is incredibly important. I know that some of the most valuing conversations I've had, where I've felt the most valued, are conversations with parents, and I think that they can offer teachers a lot, as well as us offering them a lot in terms of being part of the community. So anything we can do to engage parents and people in the community in what we do, like Sharon said, I think is invaluable.
Yeah. We're starting to head towards the end of our call today, so I want to try and leave us on a bit of a high. I mean, I think we've absolutely outlined the problem. We know there's a problem. We know that there needs to be, we need to be galvanising a sense of urgency around this problem, I think, and we've clearly demonstrated that this evening. But all of you have such an incredible breadth of experience. Could you share with us what's out there that's giving you hope? So not necessarily something that you want to change, but the things that schools are actually doing that are absolutely down the right level and that are making that great, innovative, creative environment that we want to see for our children. So Kay, I'm going to come to you first. Give us some hope.
Yeah, I just feel overwhelmed when I see teachers and what they do day in, day out, despite the conditions and the environment and the situation that they find themselves in. Just the love of teaching and the joy and the hope. I think once you get in the classroom, that space can still be yours, no matter very often what else is happening. You still have that time just for you and the kids, and that's where real change can happen, and that happens every day. I don't think we can kind of overlook that. And I think the other thing that gives me a lot of hope is the way informal networks kind of rhizomatically, if you like, things are popping up through Twitter or things like Women Ed, the BME Ed, and all those kind of little spaces that aren't done by anyone formally. They're just people getting together because they want to make change, and that gives me a lot of hope.
Excellent. Emma?
Hello, sorry, I'm having a few technical issues, so I missed the question. Would you mind just repeating the question?
It was around, we're heading towards roughly the end of the call. Absolutely. Slowly, and it was around really positive examples that you're seeing out there. I was saying that all four of you have got such an incredible breadth of experience, that you can bring us those great stories that we know must be out there. So give us a couple of those, please.
Yes. Helena Marsh, head teacher in Cambridgeshire, who's come in. She's ridiculously young. She's got 3 small children. She still looks really young and healthy and fit. She came in, she listens to her staff, and something she did was she gave them 5 extra minutes a break because they said it was really frustrating that they didn't have enough time to use a photocopier and go to the loo at the same time. So she's someone who listens and puts things into action, and I do hope you can still hear me. But that's my example.
We can, and you know,
so often,
we can. So often it is the small things, and it's the small things being listened to that makes the difference. Yeah. That's so true, so true.
Yeah, and the difference between being the difference between being greeted with a "how's the family" and "how was your weekend," and being greeted with an eye roll first thing in the morning, for example, it can just set the tone for the entire day. Yeah. And I just find that you know, I have to remind myself to do it, that the thank yous and the good mornings and the you're never too important to say sorry or to ask for help. So the small things.
Absolutely. I mean, we've touched on 4 really important principles actually throughout this conversation. So Engage for Success, in their first report that they did, identified the 4 enablers of engagement, and the 4 enablers of engagement absolutely apply in any scenario where people are working, and in fact quite often in life, to be honest, as well. And one of them is around employee voice, and that ability to be heard and know that your voice is sought and welcomed and acknowledged, and not necessarily acted upon, as long as you understand why it hasn't been acted upon and there's a dialogue around what's going on. But you know that you are the person with the solution for the problem and your opinion is sought and valued. But also there's the element of being treated as an individual and being managed well, and exactly that acknowledgement of you as a person is incredibly important. And the fact that you have input into the direction of what's going on and you feel emotionally connected to the purpose of the organisation. We've absolutely touched on that as well. And then that you see integrity at all levels of the organisation. So if there are values that are there, that they're actually, you can see that those values demonstrated in the behaviour of the people around you. And we've touched on creative and good leadership throughout the evening as well. So those 4 things absolutely apply in the teaching profession as they do anywhere else. And I think that was a really good illustration of how important it is to treat people as individuals and to simply acknowledge them on a human level. We're not cogs in a machine, we are human beings doing work of value and meaning and purpose. So Steph, give us a good news story.
I mean, I've got lots, and that's what's like what I love about what I do, is that I get to see that sort of most days, most weeks. But I think what I found that's quite inspiring is that you can always reignite that joy of learning and joy of teaching. And we've had some initiatives that we've introduced recently, and members of staff that have been teaching for 20 odd years that have come, that the joy has been reignited, and they've really, alongside their students, they're just loving it. And I think the other side of that is that if we empower our students to be able to really love learning and to see how much they can impact their school and their community, they're then going to be the ones that come into teaching. And so that gives me a lot of hope that we've got young people that are really going to want to make a difference, and they're the ones that are the next generation. So that's incredible to me.
Fantastic. And Sharon?
Like Steph, so many fabulous stories that I could share. I mean, there's schools, there's William Henry Smith School up in Leeds, which is a special school for children experiencing social emotional mental health, residential school, where the school almost dances and sings, and that's teachers and children alike. They're out in the farm, she's enabled a real autonomy, a real trust, really hearing and responding to student voice and staff, families engaging, and the potential challenges in a special school and a special residential school where children are bussed in, but they're still reaching out and working incredibly systemically with the families. A children's home with educational provision, Avocet House, again, doing despite the odds, are absolutely forging through. And then mainstream schools that have overcome real difficulties, being in sort of Ofsted categories, and sort of the community has been really sort of challenging because the schools have been labelled. But again, through that really courageous approach from everybody involved, in terms that they're all learners and all leaders, and putting the moral purpose at the core. There's some wonderful things going on, and it's really happening, and it makes my heart sing.
Good. That's lovely to hear. So we're going to finish off with a final poll. Would you like to be part of the movement to stop teacher engagement? I mean, I'm hoping that we've convinced you this evening that absolutely you want to be a part of that. So if yes, then tick yes on the poll. That also tells you on there how to get hold of us as well. So if you drop us an email to stopteacherdisengagement@fit2communicate.com, we will make sure that you stay involved with anything that we're doing, including potentially a bigger event. And of course, you can also check out what's going on the Engage for Success website as well. So the Thought and Action Group will have contact details and a page on there that you can find. And if you're interested in engagement generally, you'll find a lot of resources on there too. So I'm obviously going to tick yes on mine. Hopefully that will have come up on your screen and you will be able to see it. And we'll have a look in a minute, and hopefully we won't have anybody saying, no, I don't want to be involved. We should have disengaged teachers. So I'm really hoping we haven't got anybody doing that. Please do go and have a look at the Twitter account. So I know that we've been tweeting with #StopTeacherDisengagement this evening, and Karen will have been frantically tweeting while she's doing that. Oh, somebody doesn't want to be involved. Hey ho, never mind. But most of us absolutely do want to be. And as we said, drop an email over to us over there, and we will make sure that we stay in touch with you and involve you in everything that's going on. So I really hope that you've enjoyed this first webinar from the Education Tag, Thought and Action Group from Engage for Success. I'd like to say a huge thank you to our panel, to Emma, to Sharon, to Kay, and to Steph. Thank you so much for spending time with us this evening. I hope you found it as enjoyable and as educational as I have, and we're going to stop now. Thank you very much. Keep the ideas coming in via Twitter, and we shall be in touch with you soon. Thank you.